Today, myself and Cal, we're talking about some of what the RCP is up to at the moment, and in particular, what we're preparing for on the 7th of June. There's this big demonstration been called by the trade unions and other campaigning bodies against austerity. And we are going to be there. The RCP, the communists are going to be there. You might see some posters up, especially around London March with the communists. Now, it's important for us to be there alongside all these other organizations and groups, but it's also important that we are there as communists. And that's what we're talking about today, basically. Why are we marching as communists? Now, we've got to give a little bit of a political explanation and background for that. And that starts with the general situation, our understanding, the communist understanding of the general situation that we're in at the moment. Where would you start with that, Cal? If you explain to someone why we're marching as communists, how would you start with that?
Yes, well, it's an anti-austerity, anti-militarist demonstration that's going to be taking place. The first anti-austerity demonstration against the Starmer government, which is despised at the moment. I would begin by explaining the deep crisis that capitalism finds itself in. A product of 2008. It's an existential crisis that the system is facing. And it's felt by ordinary people in terms of the onslaught against people's living conditions, the radicalization of the youth, the polarization in society. And of course, what's the backdrop to austerity in Britain? It's increased war, remilitarization being on the agenda, protectionism, tariff wars, this kind of thing. Britain is extremely vulnerable in the midst of all of this. So I think beginning with the general crisis of capitalism is where we need to start.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you say crisis of capitalism. This is obviously something we emphasize a lot, that all of these things you outline are not, it's not just a crisis of the Labour government. It's not just a few mistakes that individuals have made. This is the logic of the system. This is where it flows from. We've analysed this a lot in lots of other podcasts and articles, that this is the nature of capitalism. In fact, it's in the centre page of the current issue of the paper. It's an extract from a new pamphlet that Fiona Lally has written that we've just published, which makes this exact point, that capitalism is in crisis and everything flows from that. That is, that you can see that economically even. There are a few examples of that. I know you were talking to me before about like debt servicing, for example.
Yes, yeah. Well, this is what the Starmer government is having to reckon with. And I think Starmer is not alone in the situation he finds himself in. All those, no matter what you promise before election day and what you do when you get into power, no matter what the promises have been, if you try to manage capitalism in this period, you are going to become deeply, deeply unpopular. And the economists are talking about this stagflationary crisis that's on the horizon in Britain. And that's low growth, if any growth at all, paired with a rise in prices, the cost of living crisis that hasn't gone away for ordinary people. But it's really quite stark when you look at the numbers, the sheer amount of money that Britain is paying every single year to service the debt that it's accrued to the bankers and the billionaires. It's something like £100 billion per year is spent servicing debt, never mind paying that debt back, which of course puts the government in a real bind.
And all they're going to do is borrow more money to pay the interest on the money they've already borrowed.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a kind of, it's this spiral, it's a debt spiral and so on. Yeah, and without growth, because there were growth figures recently, which they really trumpeted. I was actually having a conversation about this with another comrade, because I watched the BBC News, the report on this 0.7% growth figure, which they said, this is amazing because we were expecting 0.6%. And obviously that makes no difference really at all. But the BBC was really ramming that home. And they were saying, isn't this fantastic? Isn't this wonderful? Now a little bit more room to maybe not make the cuts so bad and stuff like this. I was really taken aback with how much they were trumpeting it, because obviously the difference between 0.6 and 0.7 is still basically no growth.
Yes.
And when you're in that kind of situation, there's a crisis. It's an economic crisis, but it spills into the political arena.
Yes.
Because if you can't offer reforms, if you can't deliver people anything except cuts and austerity, and if successive governments can't do that, which is obviously what's happened, the Tories and now Labour, same policies, it calls into question the whole regime.
That's true. And I think the Financial Times put it best in a piece that came out at the start of the year, which said that managing the economy is like a zero-sum game. it's hard to do democracy on 1% growth. So they were actually a bit more optimistic than the numbers are for so-called growth in Britain. And I think that's really interesting because what they're saying is democracy breaks down when you can't come good on some of the very limited promises that Starmer made, right? When cuts and austerity are on the agenda, it's very hard for anyone to really feel as if their vote matters. And as you said, it calls into question the whole regime. What's the point of voting? What's the point of politics when people's lives are just getting worse?
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so right, good. So we've got our starting point, basically, our general framework, our understanding of where things are in the world, which is this massive, deep economic crisis, not the result of bad mistakes or anything like this, but the inevitable crisis of capitalism. And it's this kind of it's this relentless spiral. The perspective, in other words, is not that it's going to get better, but it's going to get worse. And also that this is then spilling out. It's not just an economic crisis, it's a crisis of the regime. This is the general situation in which everybody, the working class, the whole world finds itself right now. Now, it's a situation that Starmer finds himself in. So obviously this is a demonstration against austerity and militarism and so on. He is pursuing those policies. Why is he doing that? Like, what are his options as he's looking at this world situation, same way we're looking at it? What's he doing? What's he thinking? What's his strategy?
Well, I think he's trying to make the best of a very difficult situation. And what I mean by that is there's very little that he can do.
Yeah, there's no right answer, basically, for the capitalist.
There's no right answer and there's no course he can pursue, which is going to turn the fortunes of British capitalism. I think we have to start with that. And I think it's important to start with that because the main organizers of this protest are styling it as this no to austerity 2.0. Austerity never ended. You made that point. It's continued, it's deepened. But I think what lies behind this is an idea that's been around for some years now, this idea that austerity is ideological, that it's a result of bad neoliberal politics, of bad rulers and this sort of thing. But I think what we need to point out is that the government isn't in a position to dictate to the bankers and the billionaires. In fact, it's the bankers and the billionaires that dictate to the government. And that's the essential point. It's not just an ideological matter for the reasons we already explained. So what can Starmer do? Well, one of the main slogans is to tax the rich. And again, it feels like we've been here before, right?
Yeah. One of the slogans of the demo, not Starmer's slogan.
Yeah, yes. No, he's a pro-business, pro-capitalist politician. But of course, that would be biting the hand that feeds Starmer itself. And what we've pointed out is we want the billionaires to pay for this crisis, but we don't think that the slogan of taxing the rich would be effective.
Yeah.
And there are many examples of where it's proved ineffective in real time. What we say is that the capitalists can hold the government to ransom. They can do that by saying that they're going to basically export all of their capital elsewhere. They'll do a run on the currency, a run on the pound. So it shows the real dynamic between the two. And I was thinking before this podcast about a recent example, a recent memory since 2008, and Francois Hollande came to mind. This so-called socialist president, as he was dubbed, that won the elections in France in 2012, and he had this policy of taxing the super rich, and for that it was something like 75% tax on wealth earned over 1 million euros. And it's very interesting to see how that, as a case study really, because what you actually saw in this period was chief executives in France leaving. You had famous footballers saying that they were going to go on strike. There was in fact one tax lawyer who wrote a book, Why I'm Leaving France. And in this book, he said that it made French capitalism uncompetitive, i.e., not there to serve the interests of the rich and the powerful. It damaged France's reputation, and in order to assuage the concerns of the kind of asset managers and French multinationals, people within Hollande's government were saying, "Don't worry, this is going to blow over." This is, of course, it reflected a real anger that existed post 2008 that it should be the bankers and the billionaires that pay, but you can't make that happen on a capitalist basis because it's them that dictate to governments and not the other way around.
Yeah. And this has been in the news in this country recently. It's a small thing. It's not like what Hollande tried to do in France, but the Labour government has made changes to the non-dom tax status in this country. And then the rich list came out the other day, and there's a lot of the rich have left the country because of that. Yeah. Now, that's only a small example, but that in a nutshell encapsulates why the idea of taxing the rich is not gonna work. Yes. It doesn't work on two grounds. One is within the framework of capitalism, they'll just move their money elsewhere and so on. And two, it's just like, who are you asking to implement these policies?
Yes.
So even if they were to implement it, it wouldn't work. But they're not going to implement it in the first place because, as we've written and talked about many times, Starmer is bought and paid for by the capitalist class. Yes. So he's not going to, as you say, biting the hand that feeds. So taxing the rich is not a viable slogan. I mean, there's a couple of other reasons why it's not viable, but we'll come on to that in a moment because those apply to all of the things we're about to talk about. So let's leave taxing the rich to one side. Okay, if we're saying we don't want cuts, we don't want austerity, we say, right, tax the rich won't work. What about borrowing money?
Yeah, well, this is something that's being put forward by the left, a Keynesian economic policy. And I think there are limits to what the British government can even receive. We've seen this with the bond vigilantes, as they were called, basically saying to the government, we don't think that you're in a financial situation to take out major amounts of money, which is quite significant because it needs to be put into this broader context of the debt crisis. I think debt in the UK is over 100% of GDP.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And of course, it comes at a price, right? The servicing charges alone are over 100 billion every single year. So a Keynesian politics isn't going to be enough.
You're just be adding more and more, and then have to pay more and more, adding more and more to the debt, paying more and more in interest. Yes. It's like a dead weight that is dragging you down, basically, constantly. That's going to hold the economy back on a capitalist basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, it typically can't be done. And yeah, this is something which maybe we don't have time to go into like in a lot of detail, but this is a global problem, this debt crisis. The pandemic massively added to global state debt piles. And yeah, bond vigilant, the markets, they are unleashing their own policies basically on various governments. They did it to Trump, actually. Yeah. They did it to Liz Truss and the Tories.
Famously so.
and this, to be fair, goes back a long way. I mean, speculators and this sort of thing, it's always been a feature of capitalism. It comes to the surface from time to time where you see these people. In fact, funnily enough, I was doing some research recently on kind of British capitalism and its decrepit nature and how it got into such a situation. And I was reading about 1992, where this happened there. Like the Britain, the UK was forced out of the ERM, the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, by Wall Street, by currency speculators, basically, on Wall Street. Yeah. Even at that time, Britain was very much subject to the whims of international finance capital. And with a massive debt pile, that is even more the case now. Yeah. So the proposal that the solution here is to add more to that debt pile. All that is going to do is subject Britain even further to the whims of international capital, which at this point is not, in fact, it doesn't think that the British economy is going to grow very much. Rightly so, it's only grown by 0.7%.
Yes. I think this is the point, right? Because the Labour government holds none of the cards. It's talked about growth a lot, but what can it actually do? We've seen the Bank of England recently lower interest rates, making money, getting money out cheaper. But this is not incentivizing real growth in the real economy. In fact, what we see is the really decrepit state of the British ruling class that will spend their money on speculation, inflating the next big thing, the next big asset bubble, overpriced housing, all of these kind of things, this really parasitic behavior of the British ruling class. And it's them that are responsible for the deindustrialization of Britain, right? Yeah. This, I think, has been a crisis long in the making, where Britain has essentially become a rentier economy, the butler to the world, as a book put it recently. And so it's more fragile than ever to the wider economic crisis that's taking place. And so there's very little that Starmer can do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that also puts paid to an argument that doesn't really come from the left very often, actually, but the idea that, well, the government needs to pursue policies that will stimulate private investment in things, basically, like get the capitalists investing. But yeah, the whole history of British capitalism, to be honest, for almost 100 years, since it stopped being at the cutting edge of like industrial development since the end of the Second World War, when that position of being at the top end of industrial development started to be taken by other countries in Europe, for example. Britain moved increasingly towards finance capital. It is not invest. It will only invest to make a profit.
Yes.
And that does not mean investing in infrastructure and things that are actually useful and things that it means speculating. That's how they make their profits.
Yeah.
So you can, the idea that Starmer and the Starmer government might pursue policies to stimulate private investment, it won't work because all they will do is gamble the money.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, we come back to the point that we started with basically, which is that whatever policies he tries to pursue, whatever policies Starmer pursues, there's wrong. There is no way forward. They are wrong policies.
Yes.
From a capitalist point of view, which it's the logic of the system. He's trapped by that. So what are we saying then? What's the alternative? Like with some of these slogans, these demands, they will be present there on the demonstration.
Yep.
These demands that Starmer pursue this or that kind of policy within the capitalist system. What are we saying?
We want to expropriate the rich. We want to expropriate the billionaires. And it's very clear, and I think Fiona brings this out brilliantly in the new pamphlet that you mentioned at the beginning, Why You Should Be a Communist, that there is a growing anti-business, anti-billionaire sentiment amongst a lot of young people that have been radicalized significantly. I would say there's a lot of people out there that, because it is the dominant ideas that the left are putting forward, are taken in by this idea that taxing the rich, a wealth tax. Gary Stevenson is talking a lot about this at the moment. This is in popular consciousness and people support this. And we agree with this sentiment. We think the billionaires should pay. Just to give some examples, British billionaires now, the ones that haven't basically flew the coop, have a total of 182 billion that they're sitting on. And this is around the same as the annual public spending on healthcare, on social care costs. I think Fiona puts it very well in the pamphlet, where it's just such a stark reminder of how significant this wealth divide is, that it would take an average worker 16,000 years to earn $1 billion, right? We are up for these people paying. We think that it's the working class that produces all of the wealth in society, and therefore they should enjoy the spoils of that. But it can only really come from seizing their wealth. And this is the thing that the left do not want to touch whatsoever. It almost feels like being stuck in a time capsule, being back in 2008, where this was very, very dominant, this idea of austerity being ideological. And I think the left is really out of touch with the mood that exists. And I in preparation for this, I found some quotes of people that are writing into our website at the moment. We're putting up lots of posters, Revolution Against the Billionaires, part of our campaign. And I think these really reflect the mood very well. Just this morning, someone wrote in wanting to join the London organization, saying, I grew up poor and I'm sick of the rich. There was another one where someone said, I'm starting to realize that taxing the rich will never be enough. Production for profit will still be the primary economic driver. And as long as this is the case, things will get worse.
I mean, that, to be honest, that quote at the end there, that's the main thing, I think. Because some of those other policies that we spoke about before, tax the rich, borrow more money, this kind of thing, it's not inconceivable. It's not completely out of this world. The idea that under the pressure of a mass militant movement, the government could say, all right, fine, we'll do we'll tax the rich a bit more, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It seems pretty unlikely. It would be a massive struggle to get there, but it is possible. It's happened in the past.
Yeah.
But as long as the economy remains in the hands of people who will only invest and produce for profit, as soon as that movement dies down and ebbs, which it inevitably does, history teaches that as well, then then those gains, those policies that were won on the back of the struggle will be taken back.
Yes.
You're seeing this in a big way now and over a long period of history. Like the NHS was won through struggle.
Yes.
And now is being clawed back because the capitalists can't afford it anymore.
Yeah.
This is obviously, as long as you leave the economy in their hands and the running of society in their hands, this is what will happen. So yeah, this person who's written in is exactly right. As long as production for profit remains the driver, things will get worse. And so you have to take production out of the hand. It's a question of ownership of the means of production.
Yeah.
Which is the fight for socialism. And that's really what this slogan, this idea of expropriate the billionaires, is all about. It's not just about like taking their bank accounts off them. It's taking the things that produce that money. It's the means of production. This is what we're getting at. And yeah, look, I really strongly agree with this point, which I think we need to emphasize quite strongly, that all of the people, and I think it'll be tens, it could be hundreds of thousands of people on this demonstration on the 7th of June, and all the people organizing it is supported by a number of trade unions and other organizations. Obviously, the intentions are all very good. Everybody wants things, everyone's on the same side in the sense that we all want things to get better for working class people and we're opposed to the rich. But it is like we've got to get real a little bit. Communists are sometimes talked about as being these crazy utopian dreamers. When I saw this demonstration advertised, Stop Austerity 2.0, I thought this is insane.
Yeah.
This is ultra utopianism.
Yeah.
Because marches against austerity, A to B marches saying, trying to change the then Tory government's mind. Maybe don't make the cuts, maybe do something else instead, just appealing to them with a big demonstration. Obviously didn't work.
Yeah.
And it hasn't worked. At no point has that worked. And now they're doing the exact same thing when a new round of even deeper cuts are coming.
Yes.
There seems to be no reflection whatsoever on what has come before, why that's happened, no look at like the deeper logic and a kind of deeper understanding of how we've got to where we've got and why this is continuing and why is Starmer doing this off the back. Was he just convinced by David Cameron and George Osborne? Mm-hmm. And has he just changed his mind and that is now how he thinks? There's no analysis whatsoever of that.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, it's pretty frustrating. Yes, everyone's intentions are good, and we got to be patient with people. We've got to explain, and we've got to put our ideas forward. But with the leaders of these movements, they're being irresponsible, to be honest, because all that's going to happen is a new generation of activists are going to come on this demonstration and others. There's all that anger that you talked about earlier in society, and they're just going to squander it. These people who are putting forward the same tired, no good, useless, unworkable, utopian slogans and plans.
Yeah, I think that's it, right? We as communists, we stand for every reform that the working class can gain. And of course, there's lots of strikes taking place at the moment, like the bin workers strike in Birmingham going head to head with the Labour Council that's proposing an £8,000 pay reduction per year. I think that's about 20% of the pay packet that bin workers receive. This is a harbinger of what's to come. I think when we say that reformists are the biggest utopians of all, it's because they see each reform as an end in itself. Yeah. Whereas for us, we understand that they are partial and incomplete. It will never be complete until we actually own the means of producing wealth in the first place. So we will be fighting for every reform, every attack that this Labour government carries out against the working class. But I think you're right. We have to get real about this. What the period we've entered into is not a period of class peace. Yeah. There is no buying off, the working class, because there's nothing to give the working class unless there is mass pressure that is built. And I don't feel like the leadership are really looking reality in the face, and it is very frustrating.
Yeah, that's right. They're not looking at the real situation, and you're quite right. Like those people writing in that you read out there, they're also not looking at the mood of people, because it doesn't take someone who's read everything that Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky has ever written to realize that actually the problem here is something much, much deeper.
Yes,
that it's not just an ideological question. There's a crisis of the system. Mm-hmm. Loads of people are drawing that conclusion, and we've talked about that a lot in the past. There's a massive, deep, really raw kind of anger in society. They're not looking at that. They're looking for little tinkering around the edges and trying to be clever and whatever, and looking at parliamentary politics and thinking, how can we maximize our impact within this basically festering mess of the House of Commons, when actually there's a kind of really raw anger that exists, and that's what we should be basing ourselves on. That's what we should be connecting with. That's what this demo really should be about.
Yeah, for sure. And just think about the mood around Luigi Mangione, for instance, for his alleged action against a CEO top of a healthcare company. Enormous public sympathy with people asking, who are the real murderers?
Yeah.
As communists, we don't think that austerity is ideological. It flows from the system, and it is social murder. Like, let's call a spade a spade. When we look at the impact of Starmer's policies over the last 10 months, it means elderly people will freeze to death. It means people will not get the right kind of provisions from the state. Mental health facilities are being shut down, and disabled people are being attacked. This, I think, was put very well in a recent paper where we had a quotation of a disabled person saying, Keir Starmer has signed my death warrant. We need to get real.
Yeah.
That is the mood that is there.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what the communists really need to connect with. And it's not just a question of tone.
Yes.
Tone is important, but it's a question of the policies that you're putting forward. That's what will connect with that mood, and the slogans, the policies that are being put forward by this demo and some of the organisers and so on are not going to connect with that, and that is very frustrating to see because the mood is out there. There's just a vacuum. But look, one of the slogans that's being put forward for the demo is something that we've used actually as well in our election campaign and some of our material, which is welfare, not warfare.
Yes.
And we've put that forward. It's being put forward on the demo. I would say that the content, even though the words are the same, when it's spoken by and explained by communists, it's quite different to when it's spoken by or explained by reformists.
Yes, I would say so. There is a necessity for remilitarization at this moment in time. And that's a general phenomena across the whole of Europe. Europe has been dumped by Trump, and they're crying a lot about it at the moment. Trump has basically said, we don't want to give you your security guarantees anymore. And he's also made demands on the Europeans. If I'm to pay any attention to NATO, you need to cough up money. And Starmer, as per usual, has been the first to jump at this and say 2.5% of GDP will be spent on defense by 2027. He's hoping for in the next government that to be raised to 3%. And these margins are a matter of tens of billions of pounds, right? And like we were talking about earlier, it really is a zero-sum game. In order to spend more on the military, you are going to basically have to intensify your war on the working class at home. That's exactly what he's doing. But he's added this spin to it. I saw this really nauseating video of him the other day talking about British jobs for British workers in this typical robotic way. And he was talking about the people, the arms manufacturing plants in Stevenage. He was talking about Northern Ireland and, wrapping himself up in the flag. And what is scandalous is that the trade union leaders are regurgitating this crap.
That is bad.
They're repeating all of this stuff about how this will be good for jobs, this will be good for our security. Whose security, right? The world is becoming a dangerous place, that is true. And that's a fact that is outside of Starmer's control, right? There is a redivision of the world by different imperialist blocs. There are fissures opening up in world relations. And Britain feels particularly vulnerable in all of this. And I think it was put very interestingly in something we quoted in our perspectives document, and it was spoken about at the National Congress of the RCP, which is the slogan of the European bourgeois is warfare, not welfare. And there was this article in the Financial Times where quite candidly, I can't remember what the guy was called.
It was Janan Ganesh. He's an idiot. He is the worst Financial Times columnist. Yes. I can't stand his articles, but yes, I know what you're about to say, and it's very illuminating.
Where he said in the post-war upswinging, this very strange phenomena happened, right? A welfare state was created, and he doesn't understand the reasons for that, the pressure of the working class, the radicalization of the working class. But he describes it as a historic anomaly and one that needs to change. The priorities of the imperialists have changed. The situation is growing more dangerous, as they say. And he said, we need to make cuts to the welfare state until it hurts. That's their perspective, right? So again, who are you making these appeals to for welfare, not warfare?
Yeah.
Starmer? Lammy?
I think, yeah, that's exactly it. So like when you say, because you started off there by saying, well, militarism is a necessity, like, or rearmament is a necessity. That's not to say it's a necessity, therefore we kind of support it or anything like that. Yeah, within everything you just explained points out that within the logic of the capitalist system, this is the only thing that can happen.
Yes.
The nature of world relations, everything else. So yeah, in the mouths of well, we've just got to be very clear what we mean when we're saying welfare, not warfare, and who, as you say, who we're addressing it to. This is not an appeal, and it's not to pose it in the sense of, well, there's an ideological choice to be had here. It's actually welfare, not warfare, is a choice between socialism and capitalism.
Yes.
And that's what we've got to try and bring out when we're putting that slogan forward.
Yeah.
We've got to try and bring that out. Now, it is important to make this point as well, because obviously a lot of communists, our own members of the RCP and members of the International, will be listening to this podcast. And we should make this point quite clear that obviously, look, we discuss this kind of thing all the time. We talk about politics all the time. All of our members do. They're in their branches. They meet up a few times a week, talk politics, whatever. And it's quite clear to us, this dividing line between revolution and reform or whatever, that's quite clear. For a lot of people who are going on this demonstration, for example, on the 7th of June, they haven't necessarily thought it all through. They haven't read the Communist Manifesto. They haven't been in reading groups and branch meetings and anything else.
Yes. They're
angry at the world. They can see, and they think welfare, not warfare. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
They haven't thought, okay, but actually, do I think that this is an ideological appeal to Starmer, or do I think this is the inevitable logic of the capitalist system? They don't think like that. Inevitably, most people, they have lives to live, and they don't have politics to discuss all the time. Now, our job in that situation is not to be kind of dismissive of those who maybe give it a slightly ideological bent at first, because they may well do that. Our job is to try and have a discussion and get some of these points across, and take people from what might be at first conceived of as, well, maybe this is an ideological question and we've just got to make the case for welfare, not warfare. Yes. We've got to be very patient with that and discuss it out and say, well, actually, do you know what? This is a much broader question of socialism. We can't bring out the class question, which is something that Marx and Engels talk about in the Communist Manifesto as the job of communists.
Yes.
It's not just to regurgitate the Communist Manifesto and denounce anybody who doesn't agree with you. It's to engage in discussions. So it's a very good thing. The slogan of welfare, not warfare, is being taken up more broadly.
Yes.
What we want is to have a bit of a debate, a bit of a discussion over the actual content of that. That's what we should do on the demonstration.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because this wanting the rich to pay is something we agree with. Wanting to see a world without war is something we agree with. This is how you open up the dialogue, and not everyone is a ready-made communist that we're going to meet on the demonstration, but certainly something has brought them out there onto the streets to protest against the government. Everyone there we can open this dialogue with, and I think we certainly should, and that's why we're wanting to have 400 communists come down from across the country to have the maximum impact, and of course put forward a communist program, because we fill that slogan, as you said, with a different content to the reformists, where it's just a case of, oh, isn't it strange that there's a weird thing in Europe at the moment where everyone's just decided they love the bomb. That it's not as simple as that, and it has to be put into this broader context of the world being carved up, redivided by big imperialist powers. The fact is that though Britain is a much diminished power, it is a vicious imperialist state.
Yeah,
it has interests in Africa. It still has the most foreign direct investment in Africa. And of course, what you need to back up that economic domination is military might. It makes total sense to remilitarize from the point of view of the British bourgeois, but it makes no sense from the point of view of the working class. And that's what we need to connect with on the day. Yeah,
that's exactly it. It's to make clear that dividing line along class lines, not on ideological lines, but there's class interests involved here. Yeah, that's very good. And I mean, I think like one of the important points to get across here as well is that we are in a position, and like hopefully we'll get several hundred communists down to the demonstration. I know the week before the demonstration, all over the country, we're planning a kind of super Saturday, stalls out, maybe a couple of demonstrations. I know in some places there are communists trying to pass resolutions through student unions or trade union branches, trying to get them to support the demonstration. So we're going to try and build up for a little bit. And then, lots of communists out on the day. Great. Marching as a block and engaging. We'll march as a block and raise our banners high, but we're not just there for a spectacle. We want to actually discuss a little bit with people on this demonstration, test our ideas out, see how people respond and so on. But one of the things that we really need to make sure of is that we are clear about who we're targeting, about who we're trying to talk to.
Yes.
Because there is this, and we talked about this earlier, there is this mood in society that I think is missed by a lot of people. Yes. I detect often, not among our own comrades, not among communists, not among members of the RCP, but I detect in the kind of left reformist circles, and there's loads of organizations around that, but the different activist organizations and so on. I detect a bit of a pessimism, to be honest, and a bit of a feeling that we're on the back foot in some way.
Yes.
There's this, they talk about a rise of the far right and a rise of even fascism and things like this. Now, we've discussed this elsewhere, that we do not see that situation, basically. What we see is a mass of anger in society, a complete vacuum on the left of any serious ideas. It's not enough. There's plenty of people sort of saying vaguely left-wing things around the place, commentate. They might not get much.
Too many.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, some of them could do with shutting up a bit, but maybe not so much in the mainstream press. But if you look for it, there's plenty of stuff around. But none of it is very good. That's the point. None of it is all the kind of ideas that we've been criticizing today. There's this massive vacuum on the left, and as a result, these opportunists like Nigel Farage seize on that anger and they manage to connect with that anger because they sound to a lot of people like they have the interests of the working class at heart. In fact, a couple of big trade unions are not supporting this demonstration, and they've even come out with. I mean, that's for certain reasons. That's also because they're tied to the Labour Party. But some of them have come out with statements like, well, actually, a lot of our members will vote for reform.
Yeah, Unite.
Unite has said that, exactly. And so they're trying to understand. They haven't really got a response to it, but they're trying to triangulate this situation where they've got people who actually are, or basically they've got people who are connected to reform or connecting with the kind of rhetoric that reform is putting out. Working class people. Now, to smear or to kind of tar all those people who are going to vote for reform and say, well, they're just far right and they're just racist and this sort of thing, that's never going to fly. That's not going to work. The problem is that Labour is so right-wing, its austerity is so bad, it's allowing someone like Farage on some questions, like he's given a message of support to the bin strikers, for example. They're allowing him to outflank them on the left. Now, the point we've got to understand then is that this is not some big shift all of a sudden of the mass of the population towards the right. And all of a sudden, everyone's decided, you know what, we love capitalism and we love private property and profit, and we love billionaires, and we want to see more of a class division in society. It's the exact opposite. Yes. That's not the mood at all. Yeah. And so this is not the time to kind of be a bit morose, a bit on the defensive. Now is the time to be on a massive offensive, to try and start to fill that vacuum.
Yes, absolutely. And what is lacking is a revolutionary program.
Yeah.
There's so many ideas that are there on the left. They're recycling a lot of them with this demonstration coming up. And it's not enough. And I think you're absolutely right that this mood hasn't really been detected by a lot of the left. That, it feels like they're stuck 15 years ago and have learnt nothing from the last 15 years.
That's the main thing.
And I think this mood that we're describing is one where ordinary people understand that war flows from the logic of the capitalist system. They might not be able to articulate it as a Marxist, but that's not what's important. They can understand that the world is becoming far more dangerous that genocides are being reported. I mean, they're describing the Gaza genocide as the most documented in real time genocide that's ever taken place. It's affected people that might not have known anything about Palestine before. It's affected ordinary workers that have felt blocked within their trade unions in doing anything about it. This is the mood that we're talking about. And I think this is why it's very important for communists to have a positive program as to what we call for, right? We call for a revolution against the billionaires. We don't think that taxing the rich would be effective. The only way of making them pay is by seizing their wealth. But we don't stop there. It's not just about seizing their bank accounts, as you were saying. It's about creating a society that is run for social need and not profit.
Yes.
Nationalization and workers' control paired to it. And I think the period that we're entering into is going to be a very stormy one, where the working class began to flex its muscles in 2022. We had the strike wave. Before that, a lot of the left was saying the working class is dead in the West, right? And it wasn't just in Britain, it was in America as well. We had mass protests as well, mass mobilizations in France. This is the period we're entering into, one of intense class struggle. To not see that is to be blind. And it's in the midst of this that ideas will be tested out. People will lend their support to different political formations. And we need to actually differentiate ourselves from the failed politics of the past. So I think that's what we'll be using this demonstration to do. Expropriate the rich, nationalize the banks, take away the power that the bosses have over the economy. That's what communists stand for. And that's what's needed more than ever to connect with this mood.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what we'll argue for on the demo. And beyond that, I mean, look, there's a bit of talk in the air, a bit of discussion about should there be a new left party, or should there be kind of a left movement, or whatever? What form should it take? I've even heard debates over what constitution a new party should have, and should it have a leader, and how many leaders should it have? I was about to use language that we can't put out. This is rubbish. This is not important. These are not the important points. Party, movement, whatever. The important thing, as you say, is the program, is what is being put forward. And so even beyond the 7th of June, that is what we have to put into the movement. That's what the communists carry into the movement, is a set of ideas. And so we've got to get sharp on that. We've got to be very good at educating ourselves and educating others on those points, and arguing the case and answering the points in concrete detail, not kind of preaching or sermonizing, having discussions with people. So the 7th of June is a good chance to put our case forward. It's also a good chance. We've got a lot of new members in the RCP. It's a good chance for them to go out and practice on that demonstration, arguing our case, basically, and trying to win people over to it. So hopefully that's what we'll get out of the demonstration. That's why the communists are marching on it. That gives the perspective, the general context of the situation. What we've tried to do here is answer also some of the points, some of the reformist points, and illustrate why we're marching as a clearly defined communist bloc, and also therefore why we exist as the RCP, as a separate revolutionary party. Yes, very much part of the movement, but with our own clearly defined set of ideas. Hopefully that's come across here today. Is there anything else we want to cover? Is that about it?
That's it.
Okay, good stuff. We'll see everybody on the 7th of June.
See you there.